welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. In our last episode, Brian and Heather had been living in their home for about a year and a half when they noticed some doors and windows leaking after heavy storms. James, their owner's rep, referred them to a home maintenance and handyman company to come replace some caulking and do some repairs around the home. While checking out those issues, the project manager for the handyman service noticed some cracks in the brick. He also pointed out separations in the siding and drywall cracks inside the house. He suggests this may be a more serious structural issue and recommends they talk to a foundation repair company and a structural engineer. Brian, Heather said, this time, let's call James first. I don't want to try and go it alone over a structural issue. Agreed, Brian said. This really has me worried, and I don't want to handle this the wrong way, or the cheap way this time. They put in a call to James to explain the situation. James doesn't think the foundation company referred by the handyman is necessary at this point because the engineer first needs to get to the root of the problem. And as luck would have it, it turns out the engineering company on the business card that Bruce gave them is the same one that gave them the high price when Rick solicited proposals 2 years ago. And it's the same one that James likes to work with. They wonder if all this would have happened if they'd just gone with the better, although slightly more expensive engineer from the get-go. Hey, James, thanks for getting everyone together so fast, Brian said. No problem, James said. We're going to get it figured out. Brian, James, and the engineer, whose name is Philip, walk the perimeter of the house together, and it doesn't take long to spot what is likely the source of the issues. Well, I think I can already tell you what's causing your foundation problem, Philip said. He points out water ponding against the side of the house and some discoloration on the brick. There should be a drainage system on this property, preferably tied into the roof gutters, or at the very least, a swale should be cut here to direct water away from the foundation. This is almost flat, or maybe even sloping toward the house, Phil points out. And the level of the soil is up to the weep holes on your brick. I'm surprised that you don't have water on the inside of the house in addition to the foundation issues. Brian said, what's a swale? Philip explained how a swale is essentially a slight ditch which is used to take water from one area to another, and in this case, from the backyard and the sides of the house down to the street. Oh, okay, Brian says sheepishly. James suggests that once they get the reports and quotes back, they notify Derek's insurance carrier. Even though Derek is out of business, his policy might still pay out on something like this. But something is nagging in James's mind about the situation. He decides to go back to his office and check his records from the build. The next day, Brian's phone buzzes. It's James. James informs Brian that he checked his photos of the job site from when he did his punch list walkthrough with Brian, Heather, and Derek. Well, James starts, I hate to tell you this, but we can go ahead and cancel that call with the insurance company. When I was there yesterday, I swore I remembered seeing some proper drainage around that slab. And even though it was nearly 2 years ago now, I knew I'd talked to Derek about the importance of that. So I checked my records, and in those photos, you can clearly see there were swales on each side of the house. And you can see over 6 inches of that foundation showing. Brian pauses and mumbles, yeah, well, I guess that's my fault. Why? James asked. Did you bring all this dirt in? Well, yeah, it seemed really low on the sides of the house, and our dog kept tracking mud in. So me and my dad hauled in some dirt and built it up. I've never lived in a house before where there are these like miniature ditches on both sides of the house. I just thought it was something the city made us do. I didn't know it would cause problems. Unfortunately, Derek's insurance company is not going to pay for repairs if it was caused by a change the homeowner made. And it's nobody's fault this time but Brian's. At a cost of over $20,000, they end up paying for the needed foundation repairs, grading some dirt away from the slab, and installing an underground drainage system to avoid having to haul all that dirt away and recut the swales. Another very expensive lesson learned. Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Curtis Lawson from Shepherd Construction Advisors. And as you've heard us say before, we teach that there are 4 key components to any successful construction project, and that is illustrated by a simple child's drawing of a house. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof protecting it all is proper execution. Today, my guest is my friend and my insurance agent as well, Tye Justice. Tye, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Tye is with Hotchkiss Insurance, and you've been there a long time, like 20-something years, is that right?
About 20 years, yeah.
Wow.
Joined in 2003.
All right. And Hotchkiss is a commercial insurance brokerage. You guys specialize in insurance for residential construction, is that right?
We have a deep expertise in residential construction. A whole part of our organization is dedicated to that, but we do everything: construction, real estate, private schools. We're a full commercial insurance agency.
Okay, great. Well, as you know, as we talked about, one of the things that we focus on this show is kind of the right way to go about a construction project. Our goal is to teach people kind of the right process so they don't get in trouble. And we also, along the way, try to mix in some anecdotes and some horror stories, some real life examples of things that have gone wrong. You had some issues on a project that you did for yourself, and I was involved a little bit helping out at the end. I don't want to go into details on it, but and that was not near as bad as our fictional Brian and Heather story that we've told that tale. But I hope you don't mind if we could talk a little bit about that and maybe tell me, where did things go wrong in your project? Again, we're not going to name names because Houston's a very small big town. But just kind of talk about maybe how things went wrong or what could have done better.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the gift of retrospect, we look back on that project, and I think where we had struggles was we had a team in place, and we lost a key member of that team that was a project superintendent, and the replacement or replacements that came in really struggled to pick up where that individual left off. The expertise of that project manager didn't equate to what was there before. And it was probably the first time you really truly understand how important a project manager and the project management process is to an entire overall construction project. There's so many details that are handled by someone behind the scenes that even you as the homeowner don't have any idea that they take care of or that they're executing on. And so we felt that when we lost that key person, and then the replacement had trouble catching up to speed and probably wasn't as proficient at that role as they should have been. Yeah.
Sometimes I think information tends to just live inside one person's head.
Yeah.
And when a company relies on one person to kind of carry that load, it's dangerous sometimes because, you never know, somebody's going to quit, move, pass away, whatever. And when all that information is just stuck in somebody's head and something happens to that person, you're in trouble, or the project's in trouble. So, part of, one of the things I just talked about and kind of our illustration of a good project, one of those is communication. And part of that is having some of the right technology in place to help manage that. So, we always encourage people to use a project management software that kind of tracks, hey, here's how we're doing everything. Here's all the specifications. Here's the history of everything that's happened. And that way, if that key person goes away, it's much easier to kind of slide the new person in, or at least, cover
absolutely,
so those weaknesses don't become apparent. So, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you got through that. And
thank you, Curtis. Curtis came to the rescue and saved that project because it was causing some stress levels to rise.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I could help, and it turned out nice, and I know that you guys have been there for a couple of years now and been enjoying it. So.
We do.
Insurance, it kind of falls under several of those categories in that illustration. It should be part of the planning process because you need to involve the insurance team before the project starts, make sure that you have the right kind of coverages in place, and then you are part of the team, and then there's some ongoing communication that happens as well, back and forth. And then, kind of that last step of execution and kind of long-term protection, that's part of it too. I think a lot of builders and homeowners probably don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about insurance on their project. I know in the past I haven't. I've kind of changed my mindset on that. But, the MO is usually, hey, let's just make sure the bare minimum is in place. Let's make sure that we got a certificate to send to the city and send to the bank. And, other than that, I'm just shopping for the cheapest price, and I'm not too worried about it. So Do you think that's a fair statement? Do you think that's what most builders do?
I think that's where a lot of builders start. And I think once you've been through a scenario where you actually have to use the insurance, or you've been close to one or heard one from a fellow builder, you start to understand the importance of that, and why buying the right insurance and you're right planning for it up front as you walk through the project is so vital, and that all the different parties are talking, from the bank to the builder, and if the homeowner's involved in the procurement of insurance, that they're talking to either your agent or their agent, and that everybody's on the same page, because there can be some nuances specifically in remodels that can get everybody in trouble if everybody's not on the same page.
Tell people who are listening who may not be familiar with the process, what types of insurance are generally carried on a custom home project?
Sure. So very typically a home builder, and you alluded to it with, hey, how do we get our certificates? That's one of the, how do we get our permits? That's one of the main things that a builder's worried about. But a general liability policy, which at its very core, a general liability policy protects the builders, and it can protect the homeowner if there's a contractual obligation to do so for bodily injury or property damage as a result of your construction operation. Very simple definition that can have a whole lot of things change and go on that can trigger the policy. So general liability, builder's risk, which is a term you've heard, which if you at the simplest term there, builder's risk is covering the vertical construction, the actual sticks and bricks of your home during the course of construction. This is not a homeowner's policy. It is specific to the construction period. So a builder's risk policy can be for a specific duration, a specific value, and it is only built for a construction project. And then depending on the sophistication of the builder, workers' comp can come into play. There can be a commercial auto policy, and also a commercial umbrella policy, which is just added liability protection over and above your GL, work comp, and auto.
Yeah, and Texas doesn't require workers' comp. Some states require that, right?
I would take it a step further. Texas is the only state in all 50 that it is not legally required.
Wow.
The only state. So every other state, you have to carry comp. Texas, if you are not contractually required to carry it, you don't have to carry it. Now, it is wise for a builder. It's not terribly expensive, but it is a very wise coverage to carry for a builder.
Yeah, I think, for us, maybe $2,000 or $3,000, $3,000 or $4,000 a year.
That's about right.
It's pretty reasonable. And actually, with some of the carriers, like the one that we're with, Texas Mutual, they give us a rebate at the end of the year, or
a dividend, not a rebate.
Sorry, they call it a dividend.
It's a dividend, yeah.
So yeah, it's a good program, and I definitely, that's one of those things. When I was a young builder, I didn't carry it because I was like, man, if I don't have to spend that money, I ain't going to do it.
Right.
But now, again,
it just takes one accident, and when you're paying for a medical bill out of pocket or lost wages out of pocket, you're like, well, that was silly. I need to carry that.
Exactly. So, out of those policies that you mentioned, which of those should the builder carry, and which should the homeowner carry, or should it all be the builder? And is there any overlap?
In a perfect world, and I'll answer it too. In a perfect world, probably the builder should carry it. Now, a homeowner can't really buy general liability because it's more entity oriented.
Right.
A homeowner can buy builder's risk. It's not the cleanest way to do it. It's fine to do it. But if that happens, you want to be probably listed as a loss payee on the policy, because at the end of the day, whoever's name the policy's issued it in, they're the ones that a check would come to if there was a claim.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times a builder can get ahead of a homeowner on expenses, and y'all are catching up with progress billing or installments, however you're doing it. The builder's risk is where homeowners tend to want to stick into the middle of the process, say we want to carry it. So they can do it. Most builders are the ones that procure it because they have the relationships. They know who to go to get the right policy, go get the best cost structure, the whole thing.
So does the builder's policy cover the homeowner, and vice versa? If the homeowner's carrying something, does it cover the builder, or it depends?
The builder's policy can cover the homeowner from if there's so let's talk about two things. There's general liability, which again, remember, it's the protection for bodily injury or property damage as a result of your operations. So let's just say you're on let's say that you're on a project and you hit the fiber optic cable, right? AT&T sends you a bill, said you damaged the fiber optic cable. They may, because it's on the homeowner's lot, they may bring the homeowner into it. If the homeowner is listed as an additional insured on the builder's policy, coverage would protect the homeowner. Without the additional insured, there's not automatic coverage. There's still ways to get it. We won't get into that detail, but automatic coverage is provided that way. Builder's risk, same way. If the homeowner is listed as loss payee, you could have them get the check, where the check would be issued to both the homeowner and the builder. But it's very rare that the coverage flows upstream from the homeowner to the builder.
Yeah.
It would have to be, the only time that may happen is through a course of construction policy, but it's so rare.
Let's assume that the builder is doing what he should do, and he or she, and they've got all those policies in place themselves. Is there anything that the homeowner should or could, as an option, carry themselves for additional protection for themselves?
So if they have another, if they're living in a temporary housing situation and they've got a homeowner's policy, they could ask their agent to extend liability to the new location. It could provide some protection, but it doesn't do it's not like a GL policy for a builder, right? So really, when you're in a construction environment, the insurance that's required, whether it's there's no homeowners really in a new home policy. And everybody, we get people from time to time said, oh, my homeowners will cover that. Well, most homeowners carriers, unless there's a couple, like there's a carrier called Pure that does a course of construction policy that will allow a policy to roll from construction straight into a homeowner's policy. But most homeowners carriers say, if you're under construction, we're out. You need to go buy a builder's risk policy. They're very specific on that.
Gotcha. So in our fictional story about Brian and Heather, they bought this lot, had a house on it. They bought that house with just a conventional mortgage. They just got a regular old homeowner's policy when they bought the house, because that's what they thought you should do, right? Nothing related to construction, and that house was in really bad condition. And they went to tear it down themselves before they had hired a builder. So obviously they made a lot of mistakes there. But what kind of risk do they put themselves in by doing all that?
Well, so they would have no protection for the home. Obviously, if they're going to tear it down and build a brand new house, that may not matter. But if someone got hurt in the home during that time, so that's the bodily injury portion. Their homeowner's policy, if it's a construction site, is probably not going to step in and pick that up.
Yeah, it's a vacant home that flooded and it's been sitting there for a few years, and
right.
They had no intention of living in it, right?
Right.
So like a normal policy doesn't cover like a vacant house, does it?
No, and you would have to buy a specific. There is a policy in the homeowner's world that's a vacant dwelling that may, if they put a loan on it, they may have to take that out just to get the loan. But ultimately, that could be canceled and terminated when the builder tears the house down, and a builder's risk would take over at that point.
Yeah, so they put themselves in a lot of risk that they didn't realize just by making those few decisions.
That's right.
We touched on this already, but why is it important to work with a company like Hotchkiss and somebody like you who specializes or has a strong specialization in construction insurance?
The things that come to mind are an expertise. We have seen most things that can happen, and we know what the outcomes can be. So we've got best practices. We know who the right carriers are. We know what the cost structure should be. We can provide advice and counsel because we've seen all the stubbed toes, if you will. So we know what can come up. But you kind of liken it. If you had a foot problem and you said, "Hey, I know this ENT, I'm going to go to him." He can probably get you 75% of the way there, but when it gets down to the real nitty gritty, right? The foot doctor might not be the right guy, and vice versa for the ENT, right?
Or the OBGYN,
well, there. I wasn't going to go there, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, they can get you 75% there, but it's the deep details that can come up and get you. And, Murphy's Law is if it can get you the one thing that you didn't think of, that's what'll bite you.
Right. What are mistakes that a lot of builders make? I mean, is it being underinsured, having the wrong policies? What are some common builder mistakes?
So I would say, that's a great question. Most builders know the steps to take. And so it's execution on the steps, whether it's let's follow through and actually sign a subcontract agreement or sign an agreement with the homeowner, right? So let's start with that relationship. The homeowner the worst thing you can do is say, hey, let's all agree on this and let's just get started. Hey, start, builder, go.
Right.
You're like, we'll get around to the paperwork. If it's not, a good lawyer told me one time, if it's not written down, it never happened.
Yeah.
And so execution of the actual paperwork, take the time to do it, have both parties review it, talk about it, understand what the details of it are, and execute it up front. The other thing, the place where we see issues with just the execution of the subcontract management from the insurance standpoint. So I'm speaking very selfishly from the insurance side of the fence. So
yeah.
The best thing a builder can do is hire good subs that have their own insurance. It's good for a bunch of reasons. One is it makes your insurance more cost effective. Number two, it provides protection for you because at the end of the day, I like to use the term, you're the choir director.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You're orchestrating, making the music, but you're not doing the work. You're not swinging the hammers, hanging the drywall, digging the ditches.
Yep.
And so why do you want your insurance to jump up and down and pay for everything when the guy that actually is doing the work should be responsible for his own work? So some of the stuff that can bite you is where you're not executing on the sub certificate tracking, making sure they're buying the right insurance, making sure they're listing you as the builder as an additional insured, because you would want them to step in and protect you when they're the ones that actually do it. So the same endorsement that you can provide to a homeowner through your policy, the subcontractor can provide to you through their policy. So as the old saying goes, the poo kind of flows downhill, right? You want it to flow downhill and only get to you, ultimately your homeowner, unless there's no other place that it can go.
Yeah. Yeah, if it backs up and it's tickling your toes, there's a real issue.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's a great segue because my next question was actually about subcontractors and, should they all have their own insurance? So, the answer is yes, they should all have their own insurance. If they don't, if it's a sub, here in Houston especially, we get a lot of people who are working on construction sites who are maybe questionable legal status for work, let's say. And a lot of those guys, they're not sophisticated. They don't have their own insurance, might not have a tax ID number. So how does that work if you've got subs that are not insured that are like that? How does that work if something happens?
So and so the textbook answer is what you stated when we started this conversation. This part of the conversation is that it is best practice for every sub to have insurance. Is that reality? Probably not.
Right.
And there may be subs that you're like, this guy is the best painter or the best trim carpenter in town, but he can't buy insurance for X, Y, or Z reason, or he doesn't have the sophistication to do it, but I want to use him. So is that a problem? It's not a problem. You just have to understand what you're getting into with them.
Right.
So if and another portion on this conversation is a sub can buy insurance at one time and then they may not make a payment and that policy cancel, lapse, and you don't even know it because you have no way of knowing it.
Yeah.
So in that situation, we'll use both of those, right? Never bought it, and it canceled, right? Same situation ultimately. They're now without insurance. So you have a subcontract agreement that has indemnity and all that stuff. Well, they probably, if they're not able to pay an insurance bill, they probably don't have enough to enforce an indemnity agreement.
Right.
So then it's coming back. That's where your insurance would step in. At that point, you're the backstop, unfortunately. Now, you can use those uninsured subs. Your policy does nothing for them, but if they damage property or someone's body,
it covers me.
It covers you.
Yeah.
And the homeowner if they're listed as an additional insured on your policy.
Yeah, that's great. When I was younger and dumber, now I'm just old and dumb, but when I was young and dumb, I probably had, 60% of the guys that didn't have their own insurance, and it was all on me. But, we've kind of flip-flopped that now to where I might have one guy, maybe, but, one of our rules is if we're hiring a new sub, we get an insurance certificate, we get a signed subcontractor agreement, and otherwise we're not working with you.
That's right.
And, that's one of those things that can add cost to a project because, let's face it, the guys who aren't insured, who are not sophisticated, they're generally cheaper guys. And they might do great work, but that's what you get.
That's right.
And so, as you kind of move up the experience ladder, whatever, and you start to use more of those subs with, licenses, insurance,
Real
all
office
that kind
employees,
Right.
all those things.
It's going to cost more. But at the end of the day, it's better for everybody. It's better for me as the builder. It's better for the homeowner. It's better for the insurance. It's better for everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. So it's I think that should be all builders' goal is to.
And the industry has honestly almost trained out most use of someone without insurance, because it's an industry-wide push to have everyone actually buy their own coverage.
Yeah.
And it's beneficial to you because it lowers your cost of insurance.
Oh, yeah.
But in a small subcontractor, it's really not that expensive. And I can promise you, if he works for other builders, you're not the only one asking for it.
Yeah.
So, and that's where people who's like, oh, the sub will push back on me and say they don't, nobody else is asking me. That's not actually true.
He's gonna have a hard time finding work after
in this
a while.
town, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to run a couple of kind of what if scenarios by you.
Yep.
We'll play insurance what if, and you tell me in your experience kind of how insurance would normally react in these types of situations. And I know every job, every policy could be a little bit different.
Yep.
So these are just kind of broad generalizations. So let's say a nosy neighbor walks onto a job site, and this happens all the time, by the way. I've been that neighbor. I've walked onto people's job sites in the neighborhood just to check out what's going on. So it happens daily. We have nosy Nancy walking around the job site one night with her dog. She steps on a nail. It goes through her foot. Got to go to the hospital. Or maybe she falls off the porch. Whatever.
Yep.
She's hurt. So what happens there?
Well, it depends on Nancy, nosy Nancy. It depends on her next step. So there's not. Well, we're not even going to go into that. There is a no-fault coverage of like $5,000 on most GL policies that says, hey, this person was hurt on my site. I want to trigger the no-fault coverage just to take care of them. That's very rarely used. But if nosy Nancy comes on and says, oh, well, Curtis didn't provide a safe workplace, and I walked nosily onto the job site and I got hurt, and I think he's been negligent to me, and now I've suffered bodily injury.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hire an ambulance chasing attorney and sues you. Your policy could defend you. What triggers a GL policy is you got to get inside the walls with an occurrence. Just because she got hurt doesn't mean that there was an occurrence, and it doesn't mean you were negligent. Now, if she tries to trigger it saying you were negligent in not providing a safe workplace, you didn't properly have it fenced off, and they go cite all these OSHA things that said, oh, you're at fault, your policy could defend you at that point.
Yeah.
Depending on all the circumstances. But yeah, that's how those things work. And we've had, Curtis, we have seen the gray hair on my head has come from the calls I get that literally my first words were, you got to start that over. How did that happen? I mean, we've had a situation one time where a superintendent, an owner walked into a home late at night to check on the job, didn't know that the brick mason was still milling around, was upstairs, picked up something that was upstairs, a hammer, and just tossed it downstairs thinking he was going to pick it up later. The guy walks right under it, hits him in the head.
Oh, man.
You got a work comp claim on a site, right?
Wow.
I mean, just crazy stuff like that. You're like, how does the math of that actually work, right?
What are the odds?
What are the odds?
All right. So next one, and I've actually had this happen to me. So like all the windows on a job get delivered to the house. The window company drops them off in the garage on a Friday afternoon. Monday morning, the super rolls around doing his rounds in the morning. Hey,
and they're gone.
Where's all the windows?
Yeah.
I've had this happen. So who covers and what happens there?
Sure. So this happens so frequently. There have been times in our claim taking days that we're convinced that the drivers are on they're on a take, right?
Yeah.
They're like, hey, I just dropped off over at 123 Curtis Street or something,
Yeah.
right? And because you can't time it any better, but part of a builder's risk policy covers for theft, for vandalism, if a tornado rolls through while you're under construction and rips the framing down. The only thing really that's not covered in builder's risk most typically is flooding. You can get it with certain carriers.
That's usually a whole separate policy,
separate
right?
policy, yeah. But if you think of it, everything construction related. I mean, we all remember copper's expensive and valuable, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
you'll come in and copper lines will be ripped out of the house when it's under construction. We've had the appliances get dropped in the garage. You come back on Monday and the entire appliance package is gone.
Or the same afternoon.
It's probably on
I've seen that
Craigslist
happen.
by the afternoon, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy. So, but those things are covered under builder's risk, even so far as, let's say you're building a high-end custom home and they've got some expensive European floors that they've shipped in and they're storing them off-site because they're so valuable, and something happens in the off-site. The right builder's risk policy can actually have coverage for off-site materials that will be installed in the house eventually.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And even there is, again, this is the nuanced stuff that going to the expert will get you, right? So that there's even on some of the builder's risk policies, you can get transit limit for materials in transit to the job site that are yet to be installed.
Oh, wow. I need to check my policy and see if that's on mine.
I can sell you one.
Okay, I bet. Yeah, I mean, we store materials here. We have other vendors that we'll get 4,000 square feet of wood flooring, and we have nowhere to put it. So hey, keep it at your warehouse.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's great. All right. So after the project is over, people move into their house. They've got a water pipe, a water fitting that breaks or comes loose. Water sprays everywhere, ruins the drywall, ruins the wood floor.
Right.
And this is like 2 years after they moved into the house.
Right.
Is there any coverage still there?
Yes. So possibly. So everything depends on the occurrence and what caused it. Right. So if it's because this 4-year-old was playing, shoot 'em up in the house and chasing everybody around and they knocked off the fitting and it broke.
Yeah.
That's not it. But if
it's something inside the ceiling that the fitting
part was installed improperly.
Right.
And so it pops and floods and you have all the damage. If the investigation shows that here's the way that would typically happen. Most of the time, the homeowner will, because they want to get it handled quickly, they'll call their homeowner's carrier at that point. Builder's risk's out, homeowner's is in because they're living there and it's normal. Homeowner's company will come pay the claim. They'll do all the remediation, the repairs. They'll probably do an investigation. In that investigation, they say, hey, this fitting was installed improperly by the plumber.
Yep.
We're going to pay the claim, but there's a term in insurance called subrogation. We're going to subrogate, which basically means we're going to go sue who we think is the responsible party to get our money back.
Right.
That's one way it happens, depending on the obviousness. I mean, if you can tell from the get-go, the homeowner's carrier may start with the subcontractor that did it or the builder. Yeah. I mean, you'll get the builder gets a lot of darts in the process, unfortunately. Unfortunately, you do it all, so you probably get on the first end of those calls. You're getting one or two of the first ones.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of clients would call the bill if they've lived in the house for a few months to a year or so. They might even call the builder first before they call their own insurance company. For sure. Say, this pipe's leaking, come help.
Yeah, help me. How do I stop it? Where do I turn it off?
And then they're like, hey, your insurance covers this, right?
Yeah. We call that insurance amnesia. Everybody forgets how it works whenever something really bad happens. But again, depends on, and that's in the insurance world, we call that completed operations. So you have ongoing operations while you're on site, but you have completed operations for jobs that you've done. And in Texas, okay, this is probably don't want to go to this level of detail, but in Texas, there's a 10-year statute of repose. So you conceivably could get drug into anything if it was shown up as a completed operations issue for up to 10 years after you build it.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear that.
You can edit that out if you don't want to hear about it.
I'm not too worried about it. So kind of a similar question, this is maybe a little bit more long-term, but like our builder's warranty has a 10-year structural component to it. Yep. So if you got like foundation failure, structural framing failure within 10 years, that falls on me, right?
That's right.
Is there any insurance coverage that's going to help with that? Let's say 5 years from now, they got a crack on their foundation or their ceiling sagging majorly or something like that, and they call the builder.
So here's an important distinction on insurance versus warranty. Okay, an insurance policy is not a warranty for poor workmanship.
Right.
So if the poor workmanship causes subsequent damage, so we'll just use the simple example we were just using. The poor workmanship of the plumber that installed the part incorrectly. It could be an $8 fitting that pops and causes $100,000. It's not going to fix the $8 part, but the $100,000 worth of drywall, flooring, subflooring, whatever, that would be picked up by a general liability policy, most likely. If you have a poor frame job, your GL policy is not picking up poor workmanship.
Yeah.
It's not a warranty for workmanship.
Even if it's like, hey, your concrete guy did something wrong. I can't make up a scenario right now, but your concrete guy did something wrong when he was pouring the slab. Can that fall back on him?
It could, because at that point, again, it's not going to fix the slab, but if the slab then falls off on the side of the house and the rest of the house is damaged and they come back and sue the builder, you could have subsequent damage after the failure of the slab. Not the slab. Again, it's never going to fix the faulty work that caused it, but the subsequent damage after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Man, there's a lot of ways to get sued out there.
There are. I mean, construction, it's hard, right? And you got this goes back to why we started this. This is why you want the right team, the right communication, all the right parts and pieces together, because it is complicated.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million ways to get sued on a construction project. So this is a shift a little bit. Is there anything that builders and homeowners can do, and this is related to cost of policies, is there anything that builders and homeowners can do to control costs or help protect themselves? For example, like putting up job site security cameras, fencing, posting signs, all those sorts of things.
All those things do matter. And so and depending on the size of the project, I mean, we've had, we all know in Houston, there's some really beautiful homes that have large values. So some of those larger homes, a carrier can put what's called a warrant in there. And it's a warrant in the policy that warrants that you will do certain things to protect the job site, because there's such a high risk of theft. And you think about it, I mean, an insurance carrier, we'll do $1 million house. Let's just say it's they're guaranteeing or willing to write $1 million check for $4,000 or $5,000 in premium, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a genius to figure out if you have too many of those $1 million claims, they're upside down in a hurry, right?
Yeah.
So the mitigating steps you take, sometimes those mitigating steps are the linchpin to even whether or not a carrier will offer a quote. Now, that's not always the case, but yes, those things do matter. Long term, they can bring down the cost, and they definitely give you a reason to not increase the cost. If there's a reason to increase it, it's like, oh, I don't want to do any of those safety steps. Well, we may charge more premium to do if you're not willing to do that.
I would guess that sometimes that makes it more defensible too, right? So, like if somebody tries to sue you, but you've got cameras that capture what really happened, or if you've got a sign saying danger, construction site,
Absolutely.
Do not enter at your own risk.
Right.
And then, Nosy Nancy rolls in there. You have some layers of protection that are going to help you legally.
And some of the things you cited, and you'll see it now in Houston more and more. It's construction fence around the whole project that are locked every night, right? I mean, years ago, Nosy Nancy didn't have to even try. She could walk the dog, take the dog in the house because there was no barrier of entry. Now the construction fence, she's peeking through the two posts, trying to see what's going on. And if somebody forgets to unlock it, she can get in there. So that matters, right? But that's an additional cost that goes in to your ultimate project. Lighting. I mean, depending on where it is, we've had carriers that require diesel generated or solar generated lighting at night to light up a site. Those things like cameras. They've got these entire enclosed units that you can put on a site that's got cameras, lights, alarms that'll go off if somebody comes in. It'll ring somebody. The sophistication on the security is pretty impressive.
And that stuff has really come down in cost so much to where I don't know why you wouldn't do a lot of it. I mean, we just added it as a budget line item to all of our budgets. We just said, we're always going to do this from now on, right? The security fence for, let's say it's a 12 to 16 month construction project. That security fence, to rent it, maybe $2,000.
Right.
$2,000 on a couple $1 million project. I mean, who cares?
Right.
Right. So, and the cameras, those things have gotten super cheap.
And even if they're a dummy camera, People think they're real. I mean, put them up.
I've never done that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we're going to wrap up, I guess, the insurance discussion here, and well, kind of, and ask you some questions that I like to ask all of our guests.
Yeah.
I like to hear these different answers from different perspectives. So from an insurance perspective, tell me about like your ideal client.
Wow.
Well, and let me say that for you, this is two parts. You don't really work with homeowners very much, but from the builder side and the homeowner side, both sides, what's kind of the ideal client?
Yeah. So, let me answer it from the builder side first. So, first of all, just someone that will listen to best practice and be willing to change their operation a little. So, when I first got in the business 20 years ago, right? So this idea of using a subcontract agreement, right? I would go meet with a builder. He's like, "Oh, we don't do subcontract. I'm not taking the time to do that." And he's like, I go, "Why not?" He's like, "I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that." Right? I was like,
I've never done it that way.
These guys aren't going to sign. I don't have time to do that. And I said, well, and I would always come and say, "Hey, did you always carry a cell phone?" And he's like, "No." I was like, "Well, so times change and these things happen." I go, you can't understand how bad a situation can get till you've been sued.
Right.
And again, if it's not written and the roles and responsibilities of a sub-agreement are not in place, it's just the wild, wild west. And so you can say that we said you're going to take care of this all day long, but I can tell you insurance amnesia shows up or construction amnesia shows up. Like, I never said that. I don't know what you're talking about. Right.
Yeah.
And so really the ideal customer is when they are willing to amend and adopt some best practices. And those best practices, they're not hard. They just take the effort to do it. And really, you do it once and the system is set up. And again, you don't get to test this stuff until you actually have the event. I've been on the other side of that so many times. They're like, thank goodness we took the time up front, because everything, when it works, it's like a song. Everything works right. The paperwork's in place. Everything the attorneys ask for, everything that needs to be available is available. When it doesn't work, it's clunky and it's wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
How about from the homeowner side?
I mean, the homeowner side, it's a bit easier. Homeowners are more, a construction project, you don't do them all the time unless you kind of have a stick addiction like my wife and I do, where I think we've done 8. But most homeowners, it's a 1 or 2 time thing. So they haven't stepped through that. So they're more willing to listen, but they just to understand the process, to understand what a builder's risk policy is, to, just that they'll listen and take the good advice of somebody that's done it a bunch of times. Yep.
Having the right team in place.
Totally. Yeah.
And not to go backwards here, but those subcontractor agreements that you mentioned, and saying, builders, old school builders saying, yeah, we've never done that. We ain't going to do it, or they'll never sign that. I've heard that so many times. And what they don't think about is that, as the builder or as the person writing the check, you have the power to control that.
Absolutely.
This is what we do. We say, hey, your check's ready on Friday, but you're not going to get it in your hand until we have this signed agreement in our hand.
That's right.
And by the way, your insurance expires next month. Be sure you have that
right.
renewal.
And I think, Curtis, part of it is when they first hear this, they think, oh, I got to get a contract signed for every construction project. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an evergreen contract that sits there, and it's sort of the document that manages the relationship with the sub.
Right.
And you can be as complicated or as simple as you need to be in that. You can talk about everything from how do I pay you? How do you file a dispute? All the different elements of your relationship can be outlined. And guess what? So then you're not fighting about it later when the unfortunate situation comes up. So we're not talking about executing one typically what we see, and this is the best practice we've seen with a builder that says, I'm going to have a spreadsheet with all my subcontractors listed. I'm going to have a checkbox that says I have their insurance cert, when it expires, and do I have an active sub agreement? And if you don't, exactly what you described. When they come in Friday for the check, say, hey, your certificate is expired your check's ready. All we need is an updated certificate. That way you're not finding out, oh, I let it lapse 4 months ago. I never updated you.
Yeah.
And so those are simple steps you can take, and it's protecting you. It's protecting your homeowner. And ultimately, it's protecting that sub, whether he understands it or not.
Yeah. I mean, on my consulting side of things, I mean, I always tell my consulting clients, I recommend that you ask the builder if he does sub-agreements and ask for copies of them if he'll give it to you, just so you can have some proof.
Right.
Because even as the homeowner, that's another layer of protection for you. You know, it rolls downhill. So that's
And
great.
there's some great standardized forms. The Texas Association of Builders.
Oh, yeah.
If you're a member of the tab, they'll give
free.
you the sub-agreement. And it's standardized. It's been vetted by attorneys. It's ready to go.
That's what I use. It's free. It's fantastic.
Yep.
And you can modify a little bit if you need to, but yeah, I mean, the whole relationship is right there on 3 pages and it's done. So I don't know why you wouldn't do it. Okay, so we talked about ideal client, dream client, whatever. What kind of person do you think should not go through the construction process? Who shouldn't build a custom home with a custom builder?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think somebody who's paralyzed by decision making, it's not a great process for that, because it is constant every day. The builder calls, say, hey, I need to know this. I need to know this. Hey, I need paint colors. I need tile selections. I need faucet selections. Go tell me your lighting, all the switches, right? So if that's something that you just get bogged down in making decisions, I don't think that's a good place for you to live. If you don't respond to stress well, because building a house, when you're spending that much money, it's a stressful time, and it can be stressful whether it goes perfectly or not. If
right.
There are things that are outside of builders' control that can drive stress, and we've all lived through that recently with supply chain issues, right?
Yep.
I mean, we have multiple friends right now that are in the process of building houses. They've sold their home and they're having to go to temporary housing because appliances weren't ready, windows weren't ready, the flooring wasn't ready. It's not a lack of execution. It's a lack of supply chain in the world.
Yeah.
So, if you can't just roll through that and feel like, oh, I can make the best of every situation, that can be a stressful time. And so if stress wears you out, probably not a good situation.
Totally. Any other stories about insurance debacles or projects that went horribly awry that you can share with us? Just one?
Yeah. I mean, most of the challenging stories are around a big event, of some kind. So like the story we talked about there was a departure of a key employee, right? Or there can be, if there is something that happens on a site where, I mean, one of the really hard things for builders, and I'll put a plug in there. I've witnessed your construction. You do it safely, right? Well, we've all driven around Houston and seen construction sites where they've got old concrete form boards that are nailed together to make homemade scaffolding because they don't want to go rent scaffold, right? So
right.
One of the things we deal with so often in the insurance world is where a cornice worker, a roofer, or a trim carpenter that's climbing up on this homemade scaffolding, or sometimes it's even legit scaffolding that's not put together right, they fall. And this can just shut down a construction project. It's awful from a human element because of the injury. It's awful from a construction element because all of a sudden you, as a builder, have, all these new departments, OSHA, that'll show up and say, hey, what have you done wrong?
Yeah.
And you feel like they're there looking for something to come after you for. It's the nature of their job. So those are the things that I think of that are really they're really stressful, and they happen. I mean, with the number of builders that we work with, I bet we see a fall from height once every 2 weeks to once a month. I mean,
wow,
a significant number. It is.
Wow.
But think about how much construction is going on in Houston. It just happens. It happens a lot. And so my encouragement is, man, on those details where there can be big injury, roofers, you need to be tying them, make sure they're tied off, right?
Yeah.
Don't let them climb around up there without tied off. The scaffolding thing is a real deal. And insurance carriers are starting to have a real heartache with it because they're paying limits claims. Because I mean, if a breadwinner for a family falls and is injured or dies, they'll get sued. And there's really not, the carriers, like if the builder is negligent in any way and didn't provide that safe workplace, they're at a limits claim. They just cut a check for the limit and go on down the road.
Wow. Goodness. It's shocking how many of these job sites like that are just really unsafe. And, I think there's a lot of machismo out there too, where it's like, I'm not going to wear a safety harness, man. That's for sissies,
I saw a guy one time that had a water hose for a safety harness. He literally tied a water hose around his waist. And you're like, come on.
I mean, maybe it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing.
I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up our insurance discussion.
Awesome.
I really appreciate you coming and joining us today, and I appreciate your friendship and our partnership over the years.
Awesome.
In business. So tell people how people can find Hotchkiss Insurance. Website, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So Hotchkiss Insurance. It's not Hotkiss. It's Hotchkiss. HOTCHKISS. And our website is www.hiallc.com. So we're a Texas-based agency. We have offices in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. And so you can go to our website. You're welcome to call me. My direct line is 713-292-5733. But you can find us on the web or email or call us. So we'd be happy to help. And we do personal lines. We do builder's risk for homeowners. We do construction. We do real estate. I mean, we're a full commercial lines agency.
Yeah. So whatever business that you might be in, if you're a listener or viewer, then call Tye about that too. It doesn't have to be construction. So
that's right.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you again for joining us. And I'll repeat our normal ending here. We always teach that successful construction project has those 4 key components represented by a simple drawing of a house. So the foundation's planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. If you have all these components in place, your project will succeed. Thank you, and see you next time.